Boom! We are live, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week wherever you may be, and of course, however you may be listening. We got a great show for you guys today. I will be continuing on my position breakdown, my position preview, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to the Iowa Hawkeye football team. I wanted to knock these out early so that I could get into some more fun videos as the season inches closer, such as, top 10 Big Ten quarterbacks going into the season, things like that. And at the end of the day, huge Iowa fan. So that is what we will be diving into first. And the position that I will be previewing with y'all is, of course, the wide receiver group. And this is probably the most interesting group going into this Iowa Hawkeye season, as Iowa lost two big-time playmakers. Well, big time might be a stretch, but they definitely lost two guys who had a lot of snaps going into the season and had seen a lot of snaps, guys who were leaders on the team. And one was, quite frankly, a shock. So we will be getting into all of that, breaking down my expectations for this group for this season, who I think will be the starting rotation, and just my overall expectations for the wide receiver group. Of course, I have already done the quarterback room and the running back room, and now this will be the wide receiver group. You can go and watch the previous videos on YouTube, Anchor, SoundCloud. You guys can listen to it pretty much anywhere you want. So there is that. I will be doing the rest of the positions as we go along as well. But before we get into any of that, I want to ask you guys, of course, to hit that subscribe button. I know. I ask that every video, but it really does help. And once we get to 1,000 subs, this channel will really be cooking. Your boy can make some, live chat, donations and some of that good stuff, some ad revenue, as they call it, and we can really get cooking here, support a fellow Iowa Hawkeye fan. Of course, I say this all the time, Iowa fans truly are the best. So please consider giving your boy that subscribe. But if you don't think I've earned it, hit the like, be sure to share, and definitely comment in the comment section. Let me know what you think of the Iowa Hawkeye wide receiver room going into this season. And without further ado, let's get into this. The first place that we need to start when looking at the Iowa wide receiver room is, of course, Charlie Jones, and the departures, the departees, if you will. I'm going to try and not get too far into my opinion on Charlie Jones leaving, as I've already done that in previous videos. But my two basic thoughts on Charlie Jones leaving are this. Number one, on one hand, as a massive Iowa fan, it's hard for me to look at Charlie Jones and what he did and say, oh, great. Because ultimately, when I look at myself as a former Division I athlete, and I ask myself, could I have gone to a program that was within the same league or same division as the brothers that I battled hand in hand with for a few years? Could I transfer to the rival school and play for them? And I think the answer is no. Now, on the flip side, as a guy who is a big advocate for people making as much money as they can in their lifetime, and really believing in capitalism and the American dream and all that stuff, and believing in individual choice, I can somewhat get behind what Charlie Jones did. Okay. So I'm somewhere in between those two things. And no matter how you slice it, it sucks as an Iowa fan. So I'm somewhere in between those two areas when it comes to Charlie Jones. Now, what is Iowa losing when it comes to Charlie Jones? Well, the number one thing that they're losing is an immediate threat in the return game. Iowa, the reason Iowa was able to win 10 games last year, and by the way, I've figured out that this is more or less the key to their success. The reason that they were able to win 10 games last year is because they were elite on special teams. Iowa is always a great defensive team, above average. We can say above average. They're always an above average defensive team, always below average on offense. And the teams that do the best, the best Iowa teams, if you will, are the teams who get help from the special teams, who have an above average to elite special teams. And when I say special teams, I mean everything. I mean the return game. I mean field goals. I mean punting. I mean everything. And the reason it is because it gives, it basically shores up the issues of the Iowa Hawkeye offense. And Charlie Jones did that big time for the past 2 years for the Iowa Hawkeyes. And as Iowa fans, I would go as far to say that Iowa, well, one, we have been very fortunate as Iowa fans to see 2 Big Ten returners of the year for the Iowa Hawkeyes in Ihmir Smith-Marsette and Charlie Jones. And I would also go as far to say that Iowa has been on this phenomenal 5-year successful win percentage rate due to the special teams and how well the special teams has been. And a lot of that has to do with LeVar Woods. Now, that is probably a whole different video for a different day. Suffice it to say, Charlie Jones was and will be an immediate threat in the return game. And as I said, was for the Iowa Hawkeyes. So they will no doubt be missing that. As for being a pure wide receiver, well, last year I told you guys numerous times that I thought Charlie Jones was the best all-around wide receiver Iowa had last year. He was the most consistent. He made tons of big plays. And he was the most reliable wide receiver threat, not just as a return guy, but yes, as a wide receiver threat that the Iowa Hawkeyes had. And I know that is maybe strange to say, considering Tyrone Tracy was the odds-on leader at that position group going into the season last year. More on him to come. And Arlene Bruce and Keegan Johnson emerged as the season went on. More on them to come. But Charlie Jones, in my opinion, and as I said this in previous videos, again, was the most reliable wide receiver the Hawkeyes had. Now, being the most reliable receiver Iowa has doesn't really mean a ton because, well, it just doesn't. Being the most reliable wide receiver on Iowa does not mean the same as being the most reliable wide receiver on Ohio State. It just doesn't. It just does not. But I'm saying all of this to say that Iowa has lost a valuable piece. And yes, it came out of nowhere. Charlie Jones forewent being a possible late 6th, 7th round draft pick to return to Iowa only. And Iowa was so impressed by him and believed in him so much that they had him as a spokesperson for their university, for their football team in the media availabilities. So to say him leaving was a shock would be an understatement. Here are Charlie Jones' stats. 2020, there's no stat there. That's kind of weird. In 2008, so he was mainly a return guy in 2020. I kind of forgot about that. 2018, he had 395 yards. 2021, which was last year, he had 323 yards, 3 tubs on 21 receptions, 15.4 yards a catch. Here are some of his games. I'm going to see if I can find a clip of him and his return. So here we go. Here is some Charlie Jones right here versus Illinois. Guys, no matter how you slice it, losing Charlie Jones sucks. It does. Literally, you're losing not only a piece of your wide receiver room, but you're losing a guy with unlimited potential in the return game. Can you imagine losing the the Big Ten quarterback of the year if Iowa ever had that? Now, obviously, they're weighted a little bit differently. Quarterback is a little bit more valuable than returner, but it would stink. It would, no matter how you slice it. So this stinks. Now, I don't want to stay on this too much, as what's done is done and Charlie Jones is gone. The other guy who Iowa lost is, of course, Tyrone Tracy. And, I think last year I was a little bit hard on the guy. I don't think he was as talented as I thought he was initially. But I also think that Iowa did not do as good of a job of getting him involved as they should have. And some of that is on Spencer Petras. Some of that is on Brian Ferentz, Kirk Ferentz, the whole 9 yards. All of them have some to blame. Okay. They just do. And it stinks, because Iowa has now lost 2 guys that have shown at various levels that they can be productive. And Iowa did not find a way to make them even more productive. And I think that is a shortcoming. I do. I have always been a big believer that in the types of offenses like Fran McCaffrey's offense or the Golden State Warriors, where they take guys, they have a system, but they also look at the guys to see at what they can do to accentuate their talent as much as they can and make it even better. And Iowa doesn't really do that. They have their system, they have their guys, and they plug them, and whatever happens. They don't try and make it easier. They don't try to play off the strengths. They don't really do any of that. They just don't, which is too bad. So those are the 2 guys that are gone, Tyrone Tracy and Charlie Jones, which leaves us with who we have left. And off the rip, I want to tell you guys that I think Iowa has been doing a great job at recruiting the position. They really, really have. Since Kelton Copeland has come aboard, and I have said this on Facebook, I probably could go and find the previous reply. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do that so that I can fully encapsulate how much better Iowa has done on the recruiting trail when it comes to the wide receiver position. And I want to show you guys that not all hope is lost when it comes to the wide receiver room. So here it is. This is what I posted. I said, I just dropped a video on my thoughts regarding departure of Charlie Jones. Folks, the cupboard is still pretty full, and recruiting has been solid at wide receiver position. Arlene Bruce, 4-star. Keegan Johnson, 4-star. Brody Brecht, high 3-star. MLB, high MLB prospect, high MLB draft prospect, extraordinary pitcher, whole 9 yards. Deontay Vines, high 3-star. Jacob Bostic, high 3-star. Alex Mata, who is currently committed to the Iowa Hawkeyes in the 2022 recruiting class, is a 4-star wide receiver, according to On3 recruiting services. So the cupboard is not completely bare. And Kelton Copeland has been doing a great job recruiting the position. And quite frankly, I would even go as far to say that he's doing an extraordinary job considering how average Iowa's offense is, and the fact that Iowa has only been able to get one wide receiver into the NFL in like 20 years in Amir Smith-Marset. So the cupboard is not completely bare, and recruiting at the wide receiver position is going a lot better. I also want to say that there is some speculation that Charlie Jones received a better NIL deal in order to go to Purdue. I don't know how much of that is true. At the end of the day, there's only so much information that we get on the outside, and that includes, Hawk insiders or whatever. There's only so much info that we are given. At the end of the day, the guys in the locker room know way more than we will ever know. So I don't want to speculate too much on that. Okay. Let's just speculate on what we do know. But I think I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that. Now, the likely starters at the wide receiver room will be Keegan Johnson and Arlene Bruce. No doubt about it. And I would say Nico Reganey as well. And I got to say, that's actually a pretty strong group of 3 wide receivers. Now, there's not a ton of length there. There's not a ton of size, but there is a ton of quickness. There's a good amount of really good hands. And perhaps that's why Charlie Jones transferred, because let's be honest here. Even though he had a decent year as a wide receiver last year, he was like the third option. The top options were Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce and Nico Reganey. Those were the top 3 options, and all those options are back again this year. So the 3 top options that Iowa has provides a lot of quickness, a lot of great route running, good hands, and hopefully they play off of that strength with a lot of quick routes, with some shorter area stuff that allows now I'm probably getting ahead of myself here in hoping that the Iowa offense does any of this, but one would hope that they incorporate some plays that will allow their quicker, shorter, shiftier, more explosive wide receivers to make plays. So Iowa is in good shape there. And I love the experience of Nico Reganey. If I were to just look at these 3 wide receivers that Iowa has coming back, I would say Iowa is in great shape. Had they had Charlie Jones still, I would say they were in phenomenal shape. Phenomenal shape. But of course, they don't. The guys on the peripheral that might be getting playing time would be Brody Brecht, who is a potential X wide receiver. Deontay Vines. I think it's going to be hard for Deontay Vines to get onto the field because, again, Iowa is pretty much set at the, shorter, quicker wide receiver positions. The inside wide receiver positions, really what they're looking for is an outside threat, a guy who can stretch the field and or be a end zone threat, a guy who can go over the top and make plays. And Iowa, quite frankly, has 3 pretty strong options at that position: Jackson Ritter, Brody Brecht, and incoming freshman Jacob Bostic, who is a phenomenal kid who comes from a great family in Illinois. His father is a track coach, and Jacob Bostic is a straight athlete. Very, very, very fluid athlete, 6'3", might even be 6'4" by the time he gets to Iowa. I am super, super excited about what he may bring to this Iowa Hawkeye team. So there you guys have it. That is more or less the wide receiver room. I mean, those are the key players. There's really no one else to mention. I mean, the top three guys are who the top three guys are. It's Nico Reganey, Arlene Bruce, and Keegan Johnson, with the remaining open position or open snaps coming from an outside threat, which really the only contenders are Jackson Ritter, Brody Brecht, and incoming freshman Jacob Bostic. So what are my expectations ultimately for the wide receiver room? Well, again, I can't lie, losing Charlie Jones in the return game is a big miss. Now, with that being said, and I would say that that's probably going to be the most significant area that we miss Charlie Jones. Okay. Now, with that being said, I do think it is possible that Iowa finds at least a suitable replacement who can simulate some of the similar numbers that we saw from Charlie Jones in the return game in either Deontay Vines, Arlen Bruce, Keegan Johnson, you name it, or heck, even some of the DBs that Iowa has. Okay. I think that it's possible. Who do I think it is ultimately of all the wide receivers? Well, I mean, it really truly is up in the air. I mean, really the only guy that had any semblance going into this year would be Charlie Jones. I would say Keegan Johnson or Arlen Bruce or Deontay Vines. Those three guys are probably the front runners for the return game in some capacity. Okay. And I would say that one of those three guys, maybe even two of those three guys, will end up taking the duties of the return game and the punt game. As far as the wide receiver room goes, my expectations, it's kind of hard because on one hand, I have my expectations of what I think are possible and what my expectations are realistically based on what we have seen from the Iowa Hawkeye offense. Okay. What do I think they can be? Well, I think Iowa can have average top 50 level offensive numbers. I really, really do. I think Keegan Johnson can have 500 yards receiving. Hell, I think Iowa can have three wide receivers with 400 or more receiving yards. I really, really believe that they could do that. Okay. Now, in reality, what I think will happen and what would be good if it happened based on what we know with the Iowa Hawkeye offense is one of the Iowa wide receivers having 500 or more yards. And I would say that the most likely person to do that would probably be Keegan Johnson at this point. And the secondary wide receivers having, anywhere, the second best wide receiver having 300 yards to, 250 to 300 yards, with the third receiver having anywhere from 200 to 250 receiving yards. And, it tails off from there. Again, I think it's completely possible for Iowa to have three wide receivers with 300 or more receiving yards. But going off of what we saw last year, I think, unfortunately, that is too high. And there's so many variables. There's who Iowa's starting quarterback is. There's Brian Ferentz and whether or not he's going to improve. There's the Iowa run game. There's so many factors, but just going off of the talent of the wide receiver room alone, I think that Iowa could have three guys with 400 or more receiving yards. Do I think that will happen? No, I don't. And I think it would be positive, or it would be a good offensive output season if we saw one guy with 500 or more receiving yards, the next guy having 300, somewhere in the mid 300s, and the second guy having 200 to 300 yards. Okay. That would be positive. I think ultimately that Jackson Ritter and Brody Brecht will probably split the X receiver duties. I think Deontay Vines might even get in there a little bit as well. And Iowa might just end up rolling with 4 wide receivers who are 6'1" or shorter, because those are the best wide receivers that they have. They won't have a ton of options over the top as far as 50-50 balls, but they will have a lot of quickness and a lot of speed. So we will see there. Like I said, I think ultimately it'll be split between Jackson Ritter and Brody Brecht for the X, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Iowa just went with 4 really quick, very shifty wide receivers in Deontay Vines, Arlene Bruce, Keegan Johnson, and Nico Reganey, aka Nico Ragiani. So at the end of the day, I think that this group has upside. It has talent. And I'll put it to you guys this way. This wide receiver room has as much talent as Iowa's wide receiver room has had in the past 15 years. And I mean that honest to goodness. I really, really do. I mean, folks, when we look back at Iowa's wide receiver rooms, the best ones have been the one with Cavante Martin-Manley and some of the secondary options on one of those teams. I have one in mind, but I can't remember which year exactly it was. The year with Matt Vandenberg and, you know, some of the other slot receivers like Riley McCarron and, you know, those guys. Those have been the best wide receiver. And I think you could also make a case for Amir Smith and Brandon Smith that they held down. Actually, I think you can make the case that Amir Smith, Marset, and Brandon Smith had the best wide receiver room, both on the field and theoretically, as far as talent goes, of any Iowa team in their wide receiver room for the past 10 years as well. But I'm giving those examples to show you guys how marginal Iowa has been at the wide receiver room. And as far as recruiting goes and the recruiting profiles and the theoretical upside of the guys on this roster, it's as good as any team. Matter of fact, this is this is the best collection of high-rated or if you were to round all the Iowa wide receiver scholarship receivers up and average out their recruiting ranking, this would be the highest group of wide ranked receivers Iowa has had in years. So I think that there is a lot of potential in this room. Now, will Iowa find a way to make it happen? Your guess is as good as mine. And I really ultimately cannot make a prediction on that, unfortunately. So, all right, guys, that is going to do it for me. And looking at the Iowa wide receiver room, again, this is Jacob Bostic right here, just to show you guys, you know, how highly rated some of these guys are with great offer sheets. They, you know, a lot of these guys really, really have had some great offer sheets. Let me know what you guys think of this Iowa wide receiver room. Do they have a lot of talent? Do you agree with me that they have a lot of talent? Do you think it matters? Why or why not? You know, I'm guessing a lot of you guys will say it won't matter because of Brian Ferentz, but we will see. Be sure to hit that subscribe button because, well, subscribing makes you feel good. At the very least, like, comment, share, give your boy a follow on Twitter at 247 Hawkeye, the handle in the video that you guys see here as well. And last but not least, DDAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts are feelings because your feelings just don't matter. Love you guys. See you guys next time. Go Hawks. Bye.